let me know when you see Barry, if you would.
Okay. Yeah, let's give her another minute. Yeah. We still have a lot of people joining.
We got time. It's only 2.
Yeah, I'm good till 7 o'clock tonight.
Well, we're not that good.
Okay, Van, I don't see her quite yet, but I can keep you posted if you.
All right. I'm going to give it till 2:02 and we'll get started.
We've been in touch with her. We expect her to join.
Yeah. She could be tough getting in too.
Okay, Barry is here, Chair Mitchell.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our to a special board meeting, September 10th. We've got a lot to cover today, so we do have a full quorum of the board. We're glad to have everyone on board and hope those of you out there don't have any problem with any of the technology. This meeting will be, Christina, will be posted on the web after it's released through YouTube, correct?
Yes, it will be.
And that might take a couple days, so if everyone would just hang with us, we'd appreciate it.
Yes.
Obviously a virtual meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We've started the recording. And board, if I could, the approval for the minutes, if there's a motion for July 22nd as submitted.
So move that we approve the minutes. This is Jerry.
Jerry, is there a second?
I second. This is a Barry.
A Barry, thank you. Any questions as submitted? If not, all those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed, none. Thank you very much. Opportunity for public comment. I think we have one, Christina. Is that correct?
Yes. So we received one written comment, which was provided to the board and posted on the website. And then one person has registered for oral public comment today. This person will have 90 seconds to speak. Once I call your name, please state your name, the organization, agency, employer, or other entity which you are affiliated with, if any, or whether you are a consumer, and the agenda item that you would like to address, and then you can start your comment. I'm going to get the timer. Just 1 second here, and then Tiffany Westrich Robertson, are you with us today?
I am.
Okay. If you want to state your name, the organization you're with, and then I can, in the agenda item that you're addressing, and then I can start the timer for you.
Thank you. I'm here representing the ensuring access through. Let me start that again. Ensuring access through collaborative health, or EACH, and the Coordinating Patient Inclusion Council, or the PIC, a 2-part national disease agnostic coalition that is addressing drug affordability reviews. I'm also a person being treated with biologics, so I'm a patient, but I'm also CEO of Arthritis, a patient organization. So really representing 3 stakeholder groups here. And I'm going to be talking about the UPL action plan.
Okay. You may begin.
All right, thank you. I wanted to just thank you all for this opportunity, and wanted to just highlight some key points that the EACH Coalition submitted last month in regards to the UPL action plan and especially just to put it on the forefront as you're going to talk about this in the meeting today. So one point that I wanted to bring up is a consistent issue that we've heard from both the board and the advisory council members is the need for data that addresses the affordability why, so to speak, and void of this information prior to a review could be difficult to know the real direction to focus when we're aiming to fix that affordability issue. So we are happy to hear that there's clarification regarding the fact that the UPL isn't the only tool in the toolbox and that other legislative recommendations could serve as alternative options. We do strongly encourage the board to focus on those other tools, identifying all of them in the toolbox prior to a review to ensure that all data that is included or that has been collected has context to it, and the purpose for the rationale behind the affordability is determined before the discussions start. I just want to, again, thank you also for this opportunity to speak as a patient organization and for your continued respect to treat us as equals at the table. On behalf of patient organizations, thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could ask Tiffany one quick question. You said there were 3 groups that you were representing, and the last one you said you were CEO, and I didn't catch the name.
Oh, sure. I said the acronym, which is AI arthritis. That is short for International Foundation Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank
Christina, anything else on oral or written comment?
That concludes the public comment for today.
Okay. Thank you. Andy, supply chain report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the staff is requesting that the board approve the supply chain report as final with corrections in this meeting. You'll remember that in our January 24th meeting, the board approved the supply chain report and authorized staff to correct typographical errors and Scrivener's errors. And the report has been revised to include additional copy edit and proofreading corrections, including grammar and formatting. So with these corrections, the staff requests that the board approve the supply chain report as final.
All right. Chair will entertain a motion for this will be the final approval for the supply chain report as submitted.
Okay,
So moved.
Jerry, so moved.
Moved by Stephen. Is there a second?
Jerry, seconds.
Second by Jerry. Chair opens up for discussion. Any additional discussion or question for staff?
I think it's important to note that this is a very comprehensive report on supply chain. I noticed that we got a lot of comments on we need to take into account the supply chain. And I think the staff has done an amazing job in essentially detailing a lot of the issues that are involved with setting up either UPL or any other ways to set up a different system for setting drug prices. So I think we've done an excellent job in doing that.
I concur.
Joe or Barry, any other thoughts?
No additional comments. The edits all made sense to me in the supply chain report.
Yeah,
All right,
same
we've got-
here. No additional
Excuse me a
comments.
moment.
Yep. Okay, we've got a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor, aye.
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 Steven's walking back.
Stephen, are you an aye?
Yes, aye.
Okay. Opposed? Great, thank you. Number 5, Andy, UPL action plan.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll go through a quick presentation just summarizing the upper payment action plan, and then we have a request at the end.
Wait a minute, before you start, just so the board, do you want questions throughout your presentation, or do you want to wait till the end?
It's a good question. Based on our experience with the stakeholder council meeting, I would recommend waiting until we summarize the process
Okay,
And then we'll open up questions on the process, and then we can separately have some discussions on some of the comments that we received. So that's
okay. Everybody,
great.
everybody okay with that?
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So we'll dive in. So Christy, if you want to go to the next page. One of the main items on today's agenda is the discussion of the upper payment limit action plan. So as you'll remember, we've mentioned this a few times, the board develops a plan for implementing the process that includes the criteria that the board should use to set upper payment limits. That's our UPL action plan. Because the UPL, the upper payment limit is a quasi-legislative action, the procedures in this action plan provide for the setting of a UPL by adopting regulations through notice and comment and rulemaking provisions of the Maryland Administrative Procedures Act. And then also the cost review study and the policy review process, which I'll talk about later in this presentation, are part of this quasi-legislative process that enable the board to acquire the relevant data and information to inform the development and promulgation of public policy. So all the processes that we're talking about today feed into the board's ability to set and make policy, and that's going to include the cost review process, which we'll talk about, and the policy process, the policy review process. And again, they ultimately feed into the policy positions of the board. Next slide. So there's three kind of large steps or buckets of work in the upper payment limit action plan that are articulated. The first step is the optional information gathering. I'm going to go through each of these steps in detail later in the presentation. The second step is staff recommendation of policy options. And these recommendations need to include an assessment of the drivers of the affordability challenges, and then also the policy options to identify those drivers. So like, why is a drug causing affordability challenges? That's the first thing that the board staff is going to propose, and then the how do you fix that issue? And that can be through non-upper payment limit policy as well as upper payment limit policy. And then ultimately the board, this process allows the board to take final actions. And there's three separate things that can happen. There's the adoption of the final determination concerning the affordability challenge, so the final cost review report. And then also the board can adopt non-UPL policy recommendations by proposing and through basically just promulgate provisions. I'll go through this a little bit later. And then also we have a built-out process outlined in the upper payment limit action plan of the proposed that would allow you to propose regulations setting the UPL at a specified amount. And you can do that either non-UPL policies, or you can do a UPL or both. Next slide. So I know that was, we're going to dive into each of these as we go through the presentation. So this slide is supposed to represent that there's almost three parallel but related processes happening. The bottom process is the cost review report. So that's what we're currently working on now. Then there's the finalization of the cost review report. And then, so what ultimately this process proposes is, instead of the final determination of a cost review, which is what our current process allows, we put a new step in where the board makes a preliminary determination, which starts these new streams of work. So there's the preliminary determination, then there's a policy process that begins. They can look at non-UPL process policies, which is the blue in the middle. And then we have a much more in-depth and substantive UPL process that allows for substantial input and feedback. We intend for these three steps to end at the same time. So they kind of start at the same time with the initial preliminary determination. And then there are three kind of parallel work streams that are happening on their own timelines. But ultimately, we expect that all three of these would be resolved at the same time. And I'll go over that when I talk about the final actions at the end of the presentation. Also, we're going to go through some of the steps in here, but I did want to flag that the information gathering process that we go through, that applies to both the upper payment limits and non-upper payment limit processes. So when we're going through the policy or information gathering and getting information, that's for basically all the policies that are on the table. But if you are going to do an upper payment limit, there's a more extensive process that we'll go through. So you can see that the upper payment limit has more steps because it creates a concrete policy within the board authority, whereas most of the other policies are going to require additional actions from state partners. And then I mentioned that all of this action can happen at the same time, but the first step that you'll need to do in that meeting, if you do all of this at one time, is that you need to finalize the cost review report, because that is what allows the board to adopt these policies. You first need to make your determination, your final determination the drug causes the affordability challenges, and then you can recommend your policies. So this can happen in the same meeting. Next slide. So you've probably seen this slide many times, which is the previous way that our cost review process was, the cost review study process was working. You'll see that we added a couple new steps, and they're primarily the preliminary results and policy review. So we have the preliminary results from the cost review. So we develop the dossier, bring it before the board, board makes their preliminary results. And a preliminary determination that a drug may cause affordability challenges then starts what we call our policy review process. And that's what we're going to be going through in this presentation. And this basically allows you to come up with the policies that can address the affordability challenges that you identified in that preliminary determination. Next slide. So now I'm going to try to go into depth on each of these steps. I will try to keep it at a high level, but as I mentioned, there are some changes to the cost review study process that we're going through now. First, again, is the preliminary determination, where you need to make you make the preliminary determination of the board. The drug has led or will lead to affordability challenges for the state healthcare system or high out-of-pocket costs. That's the language from our legislation. And a preliminary determination is non-final and is subject to revision and modification. So that's to say, in your preliminary determination, based on the information you have, you can say that it looks like this drug is causing affordability challenges. However, as you get more information through the policy review process, you may be able to change that determination in the final determination. So it is a non-final action there. And as part of that, this new step requires the board to draft a preliminary determination report. This is a draft of the report that we will allow for public comment. So that'll allow us to incorporate any public comments into the affordability report, the cost review report, and this includes the kind of the preliminary determination and rationale, and that'll allow the public to comment on that. And then ultimately, the board will adopt a final determination of whether or not the drug causes an affordability challenge. So that's going to be in the final action that we'll go through. And this is supposed to create a clear process on how we get from the board deliberation to a final report. So that's the main changes to the cost review study process itself. So the next thing this report does is that it needs to set the criteria for setting an upper payment limit. And the criteria that are outlined in the report include the board shall apply the following criteria when determining whether or not to set an upper payment limit and when setting an upper payment limit amount. And I can go, I think we can leave these to the board to review, but each of these criteria needs to be considered and reviewed in the process of setting an upper payment limit. Some of them, I think one thing we did want to flag is that we have received some comments on these criteria. One of the comments that we received was just asking how we're going to ensure that we're minimizing adverse outcomes and unintended consequences. I'll go through some of the other comments that we received at the end, but did want to just flag this one as a comment that came in early in the process. I think one thing we'll say is that we will look for public comment and stakeholder input. So we plan on basically setting out a plan for monitoring for adverse outcomes and unintended consequences. And then also on the front end, we can look for public input and stakeholder input to identify those potential challenges. And then also the fact that our process looks at the drivers of the affordability challenges means that we're hopefully using policies that are targeted towards those. And the last thing I would say is there's definitely going to be a robust monitoring process for anything we do to try to identify any unintended consequences. Next slide. Sorry, I was on the wrong slide. I'm so sorry about that. So sorry, Christina, all the talking points that I had apply to the next slide. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. So you can scroll to the next one. I guess we should leave this because this is just for a second so folks can see these. I guess I'll read through them just really quickly because I was on the wrong slide. So the key criteria are going to be the board considering the administration of the drug and delivering the drug to consumers, as well as other relevant administrative costs. I think this is comes from statute. The board shall determine that a UPL is an appropriate tool to address the drivers of the affordability challenge. So there is kind of this preliminary step where you say that a UPL is the right tool. The board shall not set a UPL for a prescription drug product if utilization by the eligible governmental entities is minimal. The board shall set an upper payment limit in ways to minimize adverse consequences and adverse outcomes and minimize the risk of unintended consequences. The board shall prioritize drugs that have a high proportion of out-of-pocket costs compared to the net cost of the drug. The board shall not set a UPL for generic prescription drugs that have 9 or more marketed therapeutics. The general idea here is that there is significant market competition for those drugs. The board shall not set, the next one is the board shall not set an upper payment limit that impacts statutory or regulatory amounts such as Medicaid best price. So one of the general principles that the board will work with is ensuring that our policies only affect the Maryland market and don't have unintended consequences in other kind of federal and statutory and regulatory issues. And then the last one is the board shall not set the UPL that is lower than the Medicare maximum fair price, if relevant. So I will say, if anyone has comments or questions on these, we can come back to this slide. We'll save comments at the end, but we did receive a lot of comments on this when we were discussing at the stakeholder council. Next slide. Okay, so that's the criteria. That's kind of an overarching umbrella for all of this work. We'll ensure that all this work follows those general criteria, both kind of on the front end and then also as a final check to ensure that all the criteria have been met. So then we'll get into the process itself. So once the board begins the policy review process, there's a few key steps. The first is the optional information gathering. So the staff is going to start by deciding if we need additional information based on what was collected and analyzed in the cost review process. So, we've obviously collected a lot of information as part of the cost review, but we're answering slightly different questions as part of the policy review process. So the staff may decide that we need more information. So I guess in the lay terms, the best way to think of this is that the cost review itself helps us identify the what, that there is this affordability challenge. But we may need more information on the why and how the drugs became unaffordable. So we can use this information gathering to gather information to answer these additional questions. And then I guess I would just flag that this information gathering is to help us develop public policy. There's the different type. Okay, so I'll just read through this really quickly. So for information gathering, the staff assesses if there's an additional need, and then we have a series of tools that you can use. There's the informational hearings, there's stakeholder counselor input, expert testimony hearings, board and staff research analysis, and then also input from eligible governmental entities. I would say they're all probably pretty self-explanatory except for the informational hearings and the expert testimony hearings. And the way that those will be managed will be kind of outlined in the regulations, but at a high level, the information and the informational hearings are run by the staff and allows for extensive input from the public. So it's kind of a broader tool to use to get as much public input as we can get. Whereas the expert testimony is going to be very specific questions for invited experts. So that's almost like more of a technical hearing to work through technical challenges, where the informational hearing is kind of just gathering as much information as possible. And one thing to note is that, we can see the slides, Christian, I think. I can see them at least. The last thing I'll just note is that these tools can be used at any point in the policy review process. So we'll probably do it on the front end, but if any point through this process that I'm describing, if we decide that we need additional information, we can use these tools. Next slide. All right, so once we've done the optional information gathering, the staff is going to recommend policy options through the policy review process, and then also we have the staff recommended policy options and then also the separate upper payment limit development. So the staff is going to start by recommending the policy options based on the information available. And as part of this process, we'll identify the drivers of the affordability challenges. So these are the factors that cause the phenomenon of an affordability challenge. And then we'll identify the potential policy options that can address those drivers. So it is a process of trying to identify what is the issue in the market that's making this drug unaffordable, and then stick to the policies that specifically address those issues. And there's two sets of policies that we can recommend. There's the non-UPL policies, and I'll go over that shortly, and then the upper payment limit. Obviously, this presentation doesn't spend a lot of time on the non-UPL policies, just because that's not the intention of this report. But I think for your reference, I think we expect that to be just as robust, if not more robust, in terms of options on the table, and information gathering and policy development as the UPL process itself. So, you know, I think I'll go over this in the comments. A lot of folks were commenting that we should be spending a lot of time on these other policy options. And I did just want to give the general assurance that that is the intention of how this would work. So then the last step in this process is that the board will, or staff would publish their recommendations to the public to provide comment before the board provides their input. So the general idea there is, as this comes to the board, we already want you to have kind of general input on the ideas that have been thrown out by staff. Next slide. So then there's the preliminary policy recommendations, and this is referring to the non-UPL policy process. So just like any other policy, we would identify the drivers of the affordability challenge, and then the staff would propose policy options to address the identified drivers. And these can include how a particular policy addresses the driver, the strengths and weaknesses of a policy, information regarding the possible implementation of a policy, and then the potential impacts of the policy option. So for each policy that we're recommending to you, we do want to do a pretty robust evaluation of if that policy could and should work. Next slide. And then one of the policies that the board can recommend, or the staff can recommend, would be moving forward with an upper payment limit. So if the staff identifies a driver and affordability challenge that seems like it could be addressed through an upper payment limit, then we would need to propose a UPL option, which could include the contextual issues related to the drivers of the affordability challenge, i.e., you know, why do we think that the UPL, the ability of the UPL to address these issues, the relevant regulatory criteria, so we'll go over that shortly, and then the use of the drugs by the eligible governmental entities. And this is an issue I'll work through in a second. So this is the information that will be provided by staff in the initial preliminary policy recommendation. Next slide. So once we start on the UPL process, we have a pretty robust process to ensure that we're getting adequate input on setting a UPL. We did design it to get a lot of input and have plenty of opportunities for the public to weigh in at different steps and provide their feedback and ultimately help the board come to the right policy decision. So there's these 4 steps that kind of outline at an overall level, but I'll walk through them just briefly, and I'll also try to put, it's in the slides as well, but just flag when there's opportunities for public comment. So the first thing is that if the staff recommends upper payment limits as a policy option, we're going to also recommend the methodology and contextual information for the establishment of an upper payment limit. So I'll go through these in just a moment, but there's basically a series of different methodologies that we could use to come up with an upper payment limit. And we'll look at the specific situation and recommend which policy or which methodologies are most appropriate in this scenario. We would publish that and provide an opportunity for public comment. And then it would go to the board for, then there's a board meeting after the public's been able to weigh in, where the board weighs in and gives guidance to the staff on what methodologies and contextual information that the staff needs, and basically tells us to do the calculation. So first step, we come in and we say, here's the general framework that we think will address the affordability challenges through upper payment limits. We post that, get public input, and then ultimately bring that to the board for your final input, where you say, these are the methodologies you should use. Here's the other information you should consider, go calculate the number. So we want folks to be able to kind of weigh in at that first step. Then the staff would perform the calculations and analyses, so this is B here, and develop the collection of potential UPL values. So this is kind of the meat of the work, where we will actually do the math to produce a series of numbers on based on the methodologies and information that you've given us. And then ultimately, the staff can also make their own recommendation of what the UPL should be. So say you should look at these 3 methodologies. We can take a look at those, and staff can actually make a recommendation on which methodology we would recommend and which result we would recommend. This information would then be published before it goes before the board for public comment. So we want extensive public comment, and we expect there to be pretty robust public comment on this actual work itself. There's a lot that goes into the details and assumptions of a lot of these methodologies. So, ultimately, we plan to publish a document that has the actual calculations themselves and the methodologies that we use to the level that folks can provide meaningful critique and potentially propose alternatives. So like examples of public comments that folks can provide would be someone providing their own calculations and methods, and then also just general comments on why the assumptions may need to be updated or changed or anything like that. So all goes before, so then that just goes for public comment. The board can then convene technical hearings based on the public comment that we've received. So if staff has kind of questions and comments, the board can kind of invite different people to come speak and work through specific methodological issues, concerns, and feedback. There's a lot of experts out there, and this may be an opportunity, for example, if someone submits this public comment that has very technical feedback, this is a chance for the staff and the board to work with those experts and work through some of those more technical issues. Based on that, the staff may update the calculation of the UPL amount based on the public comment that we've received, and any updates would then go out again for public comment. So say, board staff has their initial recommendation, then the board can have their technical hearings. If we make any changes, then it goes out for, so staff does their initial calculation, public comment, convene a hearing if we need to. Any changes would go before the public again, and then ultimately that final document would be brought before the board. Then that next step is basically it goes to the board for final action. So we'll go to the next slide. Did want to just walk through some of the issues around the methodologies and contextual information. So the preliminary, as part of this preliminary document of recommendations for UPL methodologies and contextual information, the staff would recommend the methodologies and contextual information to establish the UPL. The staff would post those recommendations on the board's website prior to the board meeting and request public comment. And then ultimately, the staff can present those recommendations to the board, and then the board directs the staff on how to calculate those preliminary upper payment limit amounts. Next slide. Some sample methodologies include cost effectiveness, therapeutic class and reference prices, launch price-based upper payment limits, same molecule reference upper prices, upper payment limits, domestic reference upper payment limits, international reference pricing, budget impact assessments, and then you can also do a blend of multiple methodologies. Each of these I would call an umbrella, and there's a number of detailed ways you can delineate in each of these kind of buckets of methodologies. So I think we would propose kind of as many parameters as we can when we make that a preliminary recommendation. And then also we would loop in the contextual information, which is the next slide. And these are the different factors that you would want to consider as you're setting the upper payment limit outside of just like a general methodology. So these are just, again, additional factors that the board can tell the staff to weight or consider as they're coming up with that, upper payment limit amount. And these largely align with the information that's collected through the cost review process. But this, again, just allows the board and staff to modify and allow the methodologies to consider any additional factors that the board thinks is relevant. Next slide. Okay, so then the next step after that is that the board the staff actually performs the calculation. So takes their document to the board gives guidance on the methodologies and contextual information you want us to use, and we take that back and actually do the calculations themselves. So we will post a public version of the collected potential UPL amounts, staff's recommendation for a proposed UPL amount, the description of the calculation and analysis, and then also a request for public comment. And again, the idea here is we want as much public comment as we can on the actual numbers themselves, the assumptions, the methodologies, the calculations. And we expect hopefully a lot of input and feedback through that process. And then, as mentioned before, the board may, based on the feedback that they get, convene technical hearings. And again, this is to receive additional technical input and information. The board can request that persons who submitted technical written comments or comments that raise additional issues to the board that the board wishes to explore, attend a hearing and provide testimony. This just allows a much more kind of robust conversation focusing on more technical and specific issues with different subject matter experts. And as noted before, for both the informational hearings and the technical hearings, and we're going to adopt regulations for these quasi-legislative hearings. So based on the input that we get both from public comment and these optional technical hearings, thank you for moving to the next one. Sorry, Christina. The board staff can update the calculation of the UPL amount. So if the staff modifies or amends the public version, then we would need to propose it again. We can post the amended version of the UPL work to the board's website, and then we would request additional public comment by a specified date. So again, if we're making any changes, we would make sure that the public has a chance to weigh in on whatever that updated amount would be. Next slide. And then ultimately, all this would come before the board for final policy action and final cost review. So again, there's 3 steps that can happen as part of this. There's the final determination that the drug causes an affordability challenge, and that would be the final cost review study report. And then the policy review process would result in policy recommendations, so the non-UPL policy recommendations, likely as board resolutions. And then if you are going to move forward with an upper payment limit, you would do that through proposed regulations that actually set the UPL at a specified amount. Or you could do both. You can do the resolutions for non-UPL policies and a regulation that sets the UPL. The adoption of the final cost review report, the adoption of the final recommendations by resolution, and the adoption of the proposed regulation setting the UPL amount, setting the UPL amount shall be performed sequentially when possible. However, this can happen in the same board meeting. So in the same meeting that you approve the final cost review report, you can finalize your policy recommendations. Next slide. 2 sections that we added to the report based on public comment are some information on the actual establishing and implementing a UPL. So based on some public comment received, we wanted to clarify that the UPL is going to be the maximum final net ingredient cost paid by the eligible governmental entities. And it looks like I may have removed I did just want to clarify that the eligible governmental entities are the entities that are regulated by our statute that we can set upper payment limits for. So that's colloquially state and local government. So I just want to clarify that because I'm not sure that I hit that in this presentation.
Our advanced Skyrithi's advanced treatment naive was not.
Okay, so so again, the UPL itself is going to be the maximum final net ingredient cost paid by an eligible governmental entity. This definition allows for some flexibility for implementing, and the staff has presented to the board on kind of a recommended way to do this. But ultimately, I think we want to work with each eligible governmental entity to just ensure that we're working within their their framework on how they pay for drugs. We also clarify that each UPL will be established by a regulation that specifies the UPL amount, the specified governmental entities that it applies to, and then a prospective effective date that provides sufficient time for implementation. So we would likely work, as we propose these regs, ensure that we have enough time for the actual implementation of the UPLs based on how each of the eligible governmental entities operates. And then again, the board and staff shall work with eligible governmental entities to develop the best method for implementing the UPL for that entity. And the reference that we make all the time is that the Medicaid program, which can be subject to our work based on our statute, fundamentally works different. It has much more, much different rules than you have in the general commercial sector, which would be like an employee health plan or something like that. So our methodology does allow for us to account for that broader implementation or the variance in implementation there. Next slide. One other section that we've added based on comments that we received is just a more specific recommendations around the monitoring, suspending, and rescinding of an upper payment limit. So we note that the board shall develop a program for monitoring the availability of any prescription drug product, which it sets a UPL, and the board shall adopt regulations providing for the suspension, modification, and rescission of a UPL if the monitoring discloses a shortage of the prescription drug product in the state. The board may suspend or modify the UPL, and then also the board shall provide for the automatic suspension of the UPL at the time that a prescription drug is on the Federal Food and Drug Administration prescription drug shortage list. So we'll be tracking for shortages within the state that may not even be caught on the Federal Food and Drug Administration prescription drug shortage list. Next slide. So we're going to come back to this in just a moment. I think we want to spend some time. I guess, yeah, let's skip this slide really quickly, Christine. So did want to just flag that the changes from the August 30th draft include technical corrections, updated and clarified terminology, and then we also added the section to address implementation and added the section to address monitoring. And the monitoring, suspension, and rescinding of UPLs. So those were the main changes. And Christine, if we want to go back up to slide 21, so up 2 slides, we'll open it up to clarifying questions from the board members. And then we'll separately go through the comments, if that's okay. I wanted to talk through the process. I know it's a substantial process we have. So do any board members have any questions on the process that we've established, we're trying to establish through the UPL action plan?
So just Jerry, the only question I really have, because we've seen this before several times, is what do we do about confidential data? I didn't see that. I mean, that's one of the additional informations that we hope to get. And I know that we have a number of places that have asked for an additional 30 days to get us data. Hopefully some of it will be confidential and important. So, you know, what's the process for that, if you could articulate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is something that comes up a lot in the comments that we've seen. So the board has already adopted regulations for handling of confidential and proprietary information. So I would say this is a top priority for the board. And to your point, it's very much in the interest of the board to get access to these data, as well as the folks that we're working with in the supply chain. So we have regulations that protect the data, and we also have a separate set of kind of internal processes for managing that data. I think so I would refer everyone to our confidential and proprietary information regulations for the actual hard word on that, but we do have a process for collecting and then managing confidential and proprietary information. You referenced our request for information process for the cost review study. We are hoping and planning to get confidential and proprietary information there. And we do have a series of processes and procedures to protect that information, share it with the board in a secure way, and then also make sure that it's not disclosed or used in any of our public documents.
Can I ask a question as well?
Sure, Dr. Igar.
Especially on this slide, you talk about shortages of drugs. Do we have any methods to monitor a manufacturer or PBM who artificially create a shortage so that we would rescind the UPL so that they can get back to what they think is a better price for them?
Very good question. I don't think that, I think that's something that can be built into the process. I think, yes, I think that's certainly something that we can try to account for as part of this. What we are talking about is a way to monitor for shortages. So that can be like a question that we do as part of that process. So like when we're thinking through this monitoring process, we probably expect it to be a series of surveys with pharmacies, and that can probably hopefully help us identify if and where there are these shortages. And then if that's the case, we can also try to identify if it's kind of intentional or more the result of our action. So I think that's certainly something we can account for in this plan.
Okay.
But the plan, I would say the initial and primary purpose of the plan is to ensure access to the drugs for the patient. So that's ultimately going to be kind of step one. But I think on the back end, we can certainly evaluate the risks that you just mentioned.
I had one question. It was something I didn't think of when I was reading through the first time. But you specifically called out, this bullet point of the board shall not set an upper payment limit amount that impacts statutory or regulatory amounts, such as Medicaid best price. And I wanted to just slightly better understand, I'm not a lawyer, like exactly what that means. Is that saying that the UPL cannot be lower than the current best price, or does it mean it can't impact it in any way? And when I think about, impact, like, estimating the best price is a function of like all the prices that are paid in the commercial market in the entire country. And it does seem like there might be some interpretation of the word impact where, the price getting paid by certain plans in Maryland could impact that without, necessarily making the best price lower. So I wanted to, make sure we've kind of thought about that and sort of the correct interpretation of exactly what that sentence means.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a great flag. I would say that the intention is to ensure that there are a series of federally calculated amounts that we want to ensure that our work. So at the highest level principle is that we're regulating the governmental agencies of Maryland, right? So the market that we're trying to affect is specific to Maryland, and we want to put as many guardrails into that as possible to ensure that there aren't unintended consequences into markets outside of Maryland. So that's the general principle. I think the one we can most specifically reference is that we don't want to set a price so low that it is the new best price. So I think that's the one we were specifically referencing, but we used more general language in case there's other provisions that we need to consider beyond that. So I think it's a great point. I think you may want to make sure that we're not boxing ourselves in. It's a kind of a very specific issue that we're thinking of, but we also want to make sure that we are able to account for other metrics outside of that if appropriate. And again, at a high level, we don't want to violate federal and regulatory and statutory issues. So it's
And maybe I would add, we sort of mentioned this process of getting methodological experts, involved as needed on some of these decisions. Is that the time, because even like projecting what the current Medicaid best price is, I don't know if that's something that we're capable of doing. And, is that the type of thing that could be, discussed in future meetings, how to, operationalize that? Or are we sort of codifying this today?
No, I think that's a great, I think it's certainly something that can happen as part of this process, right? This process is designed. So when we set that out as a principle, it means that we're thinking of that issue throughout the work that we're doing. So this would allow you to bring it up either in the technical hearings or informational hearings. So it's certainly something we can invite comment on. The other way, also obviously working with our eligible governmental entity partners. The specific issue you mentioned, I don't think there's a scenario where we would be getting access to that, but I think the board should certainly think through how to ensure that their work doesn't adversely impact that. So that it's a discussion you guys should have, and we should let the public weigh in on it. But I would say it doesn't need to be addressed here. It's something that would actually be addressed in the process.
Hey, Jerry, your question, are you more concerned that we haven't identified a methodology to get the information to you secure, or was it just a general question?
It was just a general question. When Andy put up a slide which talks about additional information that could be obtained, it's about 6 slides back. Confidential information was not listed as one of those items. And so I just want to make sure that A, we do get that if we can, and B, I think we already have a process for getting it, and I'm very comfortable with our process for not disclosing it.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I don't want the staff to take the hit on that part of it. That's been probably more me that I haven't been able to articulate and work better with Michelle and Andy in regards to how we're going to do it. I've just been one that didn't want to burden the board a year ago on an additional email address secured through the state. But I think we're getting closer to getting an answer there. So.
Yeah, and Ben, I think we do have, Mr. Chair, we do have kind of the process laid out. And there's multiple steps to it. It's how does the board access, like receive and protect that information. I think what you're talking about is like board staff collect and protect that information, and there's the board access to it.
Right.
So I think all of that is resolved. And then to Dr. Anderson's point, that's a good comment. We would expect confidential proprietary information to come in throughout all of these processes. We always have an opportunity for folks to submit, deem any of the information that they're submitting to us confidential and proprietary. So that's kind of like throughout all public comment processes, folks can submit that information to us and it will be protected. So I appreciate you flagging that and letting us clarify that.
Is there anyone that has any additional questions in regards to the process? What Andy just went over? Haven't heard anything from a Barry. Do you have anything you want to add, Barry, or any questions?
Yeah, maybe nothing that I haven't alluded to before, but I would probably just say at a high level, I continue to want us to have more structure and clarity around the patient out-of-pocket costs in terms of defining our patient population clearly so that when we go to gather data, it's clearer whether there's overlap or not in terms of the available published information vis-a-vis the patient population that we are focused on, right? In terms of looking at Maryland. So that one, I think, as we go forward with the cost review and data collection will be something to really pay attention to. But in terms of kind of at this higher level of thinking about the UPL process, I don't have any additional questions.
Okay, Andy, where are we going?
Yeah, so we'll briefly go through, we'll go
I
through
think I had a couple
comments.
other slides that you need.
Yep. So the next thing I wanted to go through is just the process and public comments that we received. So Christine, if you go down to next one up, I think. There we go. Yep. No, one more. Sorry. We're going to go back to the public comments. So summary of the comments received. So we were able to publish the action plan, the draft of the action plan for public comment. We received 22 written comments. The comments were due at the same day as the stakeholder council meeting as well. So we were able to get feedback from the stakeholder council that we provided to the board. But a lot of the feedback we received from the stakeholder council was more kind of clarifying questions. So we didn't get as much direct feedback that from the stakeholder council. We did get a lot of really specific feedback in terms of the public comments, and the board, we shared those comments with you. I think it was 122 pages of of comments related to these 22 letters that came in. And we saw a couple big buckets. So the first thing I would say is that we received some, all the comments that we received were very substantive and thoughtful and very helpful to the board and the staff working through this process. So just a huge thanks to everyone that took the time to work through this. There are a lot of very strong comments that provided a lot of really good information for us. And also just wanted to again note that all board members and all staff have reviewed these comments, and the staff incorporated changes into the updated version of the upper payment limit action plan based on the comments that we received. One thing I did want to note just before I go into some specific ones is there seemed to be some that didn't necessarily need to be addressed in the upper payment limit action plan. So we are looking at seeing if we can publish other additional clarifying documents to kind of address some of the comments that came in that may not have been directly relevant to the action plan itself. So we're looking at potentially, some sort of FAQ or something like that. But we did want to be responsive to the comments that didn't necessarily directly fit into the action plan itself. So just to summarize, I think at a high level, the big takeaways we had was, well, first there were a bunch of technical clarifications and corrections, and we were able to take those. So for example, there were a couple groups that helped us clarify some definitions and ensure that we were being specific in the terms that we were using. So we very much appreciated the technical feedback that we received and incorporated those as much as possible. The other comments were often kind of at a higher level. Many of the comments focused on the timeline itself to provide comments on the upper payment limit action plan. A lot of folks reflected that the report itself was posted in July, and then said that they would appreciate more time to weigh in on the action plan itself. I think the thing I would flag is just that the board and the staff and the stakeholder council have been working at a high level on these issues for well over a year now. I think we first presented to the board. Yeah, we can go through this part. First presented to the board in July of 2023. The Stakeholder Council was able to weigh in August of 23. We also got further guidance from the board in September of 23, and the Stakeholder Council got to weigh in on that. The supply chain report. So it was timely that we were able to bring the supply chain report up again, because I think issues outlined and addressed in the supply chain report were responsive to a lot of the comments that we received. So for example, a lot of folks were saying that, you know, UPLs may not be the right choice. You should be looking at other policy options and looking at the root causes based on the supply chain. And I think our supply chain report reflects that the board kind of has gone through that process and will ensure to do that for each drug. And then ultimately you had a board meeting in July as well. So it's been a process that we've been working on for, you know, well over a year now. One of the many of the comments I should say requested more specificity on the criteria and calculations for setting the upper payment limit. As you can see, what we've outlined is a process as much as anything else to make sure that we are getting to the right policy outcome and decision by the board, and that is by articulating the criteria and the principles and the general ideas, but then also allowing for very robust public input and allowing the board the needed flexibility to address different scenarios. Each drug is going to have its own challenges, and we want the board to be able to look at the full palette of options that are available for each drug. Some comments requested more specificity on the process and monitoring. Specifically, a lot of folks wanted, it almost sounds like the commenters wanted a level of predictability on what the outcome of this process would be. And I think at a high level, basically like at a high level, if two drugs are similarly situated, how can you ensure that they'll kind of go through the same process and reach the same outcome? And I think this process really does try to address that. The fact that the board first starts by identifying why the drug is unaffordable and then coming up with the policies that address those drivers ensures that the drugs that are similarly situated should kind of go through the same process and come with the same outcome. Let's see. And then the last set of comments that I would say, sorry, staying on this one, Christina, yeah, thanks. The last set of comments, and this I think was a substantial number, is the outlining just potential risks to patient access and adverse impacts on members of the supply chain, such as pharmacies and physicians. There was a lot of discussion around, physician-administered drugs and ensuring that folks throughout the supply chain are able to acquire the drugs within the upper payment limit. And I think just at a high level, the board's recommended a methodology for implementation for state and local government that shouldn't affect stakeholders within the supply chain. Ultimately, it's going to be up to each kind of eligible governmental entity to figure out exactly how it works in their scenarios. But what we've talked about up to this point is not touching anything within the supply chain and ultimately getting to this UPL net final price through the rebate structure. And that is, again, just to ensure, since we're working with a very specific part of the market, ensuring that we're not causing any unintended or adverse consequences. So I would say those are at the highest level, the comments that we saw and wanted to be responsive to. But I do know that all board members were able to review. So if any board members had any comments that they wanted to address or have any questions for staff, we're happy to answer those. And we can keep that on, Christina, we can keep it on the comments. We'll talk through the next steps at the end.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Andy or anybody else?
So I will. I very much appreciate the stakeholder council, the people, the organizations that have written in. I've had a chance to read all of the comments, carefully review them, take them all very seriously. And sort of Andy has described one set of things that he's read, and I've read pretty much the same thing, but I'll let him give it my spin as opposed to his. And so I saw 2 main comments that were being made and 4 additional comments that most of them talked about. And there was some other ones as well. The first one was about the major one was about delaying the UPL for more time and more study. And the second one was more specificity. So what Andy noted is that we started this process even before July 24, 2023. We were meeting as individual members with staff long before that. So we have been doing UPL analysis off and on for over a year. We received a lot of very valuable comments. We improved the UPL process, I think, dramatically as a result of that. But I think we've now reached a place where, you know, we could get some more comments, but I think we've really reached a period of diminishing returns in that we've heard many of these comments before, and we're not here. I'm not seeing any particularly new comments about we're calling for an additional delay. The second main comment that was for more specificity, and I think in this case, one size does not fit all. I think what we have done is very carefully laid out the criterion that we're using. We're following to a large extent the legislation that was adopted in the UPL plan. We've identified 10 factors and even a few more that we will consider. But what I recognize is that each drug is unique and probably will require a slightly different approach. Some of the drugs have a lot of NIH funding when they were developed. Some of them don't. Some of them have a very high cost per dose. Some of them have much lower cost. Some of them require one dose a month or even just one dose. Some of them require doses every day or multiple times during the day. Some of them have very high cost to patients. Some of them have low cost to patients. Some of them have high cost to the government. Some have low cost to the government. Some have a couple of therapeutic alternatives. Some are the only therapeutic. Some of them are orphans. Some of them have high research and development costs. Some of them have low research and development costs. Some of them have been on the market for a long time. Some of them have been on the market for a short time. Some of them have coupons. I could go on, but my point is that there are so many variations. Even drugs that are in the same therapeutic class have very, very different characteristics. There's also, I read 4 other concerns. One is about unintended consequences. Totally understand that. We need to pay attention to that very carefully. But again, I'll come back to the fact that each drug is unique. The unintended consequences for a cancer drug will be different ones for dermatology, different for HIV. Some of them are physician administered, some of them are dispensed in a pharmacy. There are many different therapeutic alternatives. So yes, we have to pay attention to unintended consequences, but we're going to have to do it, in my view, drug specific as opposed to having a very general idea, although we've written what we think are the unintended consequences that we should be concerned about. The second sort of concern I read was use of UPLs versus other options. And I think that is very much an important thing to consider. I mean, you know, UPL is one thing that we can use, but we can do other things. And so I think there's, again, each drug is going to be unique. How is it dispensed? What is the existing regulations? How does the Medicaid program deal with this drug? How does the state employees deal with the drug? What is the formulary design? What recommendations for legislation or other activities could we come up with aside from UPL? But each one of these, again, is drug specific. We talked earlier today about the drug supply chain, which again was a third thing that I read quite frequently about. And we do have a 111-page report. And you know, each these drugs have could be physician administered or pharmacy administered. They have different therapeutic alternatives. They could have a specialty pharmacy. They're even now increasingly direct sales to patients by some of the drug companies. Some of them have coupons. All these things have to be taken into account. I think they're all listed in the 111-page report, but it's going to be drug specific. And finally, confidential data. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to review confidential data that either the PBMs or the drug companies or the wholesalers or anybody involved in this process has to share with us. It is, I'm very encouraged that they've asked for extensions. I really do hope that they provide the data. And as we've already talked about, I think we have robust processes in place to keep this data confidential. CMS was able, and I was amazed, to do this for their negotiations. I hope that Maryland PDAB could do the same. With that, that's what I read in the comments. There's more things, but those were my 6 major things that I read in the comments.
Great, thanks, Jerry. Joe, you have anything?
Yeah, I think I'll echo Jerry's comments about, taking those 100+ pages of comments and really, addressing them, which I think the staff has done a very commendable job of trying to address, a large and, many very reasonable comments. And I feel like we've added clarity to this document, and I'm appreciate all the efforts that have gone on behind the scenes.
Great. Stephen or Barry?
Well, the one point that I just want to make is that many of the comments seem to think that we were going to be eliminating a drug from the market. And, that's absolutely not the case. We're just trying to save money, both for our patients and for the state. So, we're not eliminating anything. We're not going to keep anybody from getting anything. We're just going to pay a little less for it. So that's the important thing that I think is the most take home.
Okay.
And a comment I could make, and again, appreciate the time that everyone has taken who submitted these comments. I know it takes time to develop these consensus statements. It is very helpful for the board. We take it very seriously. So I wanted to echo that prior comment, just showing appreciation for everyone's time there. Definitely agreeing with the prior comments that have been said. What I might add to that is some of the comments were around the process and a lack of specificity. And for many reasons, some of which have been articulated before, it is going to be hard to be specific until we start. And that's why we've pushed to start, because even when you have a process that's committed to transparency and methodology and talking about the rationale for why you elevate one method versus another, no method is uniformly best. And so until you start and stress test that process, you can't even improve your methodology and your process for selection. So that's why I've been a big proponent of getting involved with the cost reviews, and then working through that process to see where we land. The other thing I want to add here too is, it is also a priority of ours to really think carefully about the out-of-pocket costs. We are mandated to look at affordability to the healthcare system, as well as out-of-pocket costs. And so I thought I saw a couple of comments there about not heading to UPL before considering patient perspectives, and wanted to just provide the reassurance that that is in fact a priority of ours to do all that as part of the cost review, within the limits given to us by the regulations. And that's it for me.
Great comments. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Andy, do you have anything else at this point in time?
If we wanted to go to the last slide, we can just show you next steps really briefly. Yeah. Yep. So if you scroll down, Christina, to slide 24, it just gives kind of the steps. So we outlined the different UPL work that we've been doing over the past year, and then also just articulated some of the previous actions that we've done. So I think that's it. And then we do have requests for the board as a result of this presentation.
All right. Yeah, I'd just like to echo. I mean, I've kind of been in and out of Maryland for 30 years, and I'm not sure, to the board's comments, I'm not sure I've ever seen a process, and this is kudos to staff, it's certainly not me, where it has been as deliberate and transparent and wanting to do the right thing. Does that mean we're going to get it 100% correct? Not sure yet, to be determined, but for a little team to be able to do as much as they've done, both with Christina and the Stakeholder Council in the last year, as well as the board and Andy and Michelle and Krishna and everyone. It's not like you got a staff of 100 people back in the back room, and to go through all of the things that they have been through the last year and be able to throw a couple meetings, extra meetings in between. It's really hats off to everyone that has rolled up their sleeves. But I think I've never seen and I've worked with a lot of different groups in the state. I don't think I've ever seen a group take as serious as this upper payment limit issue has been created at this point in time. So I just wanted to echo Jerry and Joe and Barry and Stephen's comments from my standpoint. With that, let me, if the board so desires or someone, I'll entertain a motion for the upper payment limit process.
So moved that we approve the upper payment limit as specified.
Jerry, and let me get a second before questions.
Second.
Sorry, should we add subject to staff corrections and typographical errors? I'm asking a process question. I don't actually know.
I think that's fitting. We've done that before with the supply chain report, as you know.
And Mr. Chair, I would also just note there is one correction that we'll want to make. It references the supply chain report as a draft supply chain report. Now that you finalize that, we would remove that. I think that's the only change that we would make. Yeah.
And just to clarify, your motion is to approve the upper payment limit action plan as drafted, subject to typographical and Scrivener error corrections. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it
Right,
me or
Joe?
Jerry? But
Correct.
yes, I am happy to make that motion.
That's to Joe. Joe's amending Jerry's motion for a second.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we got a motion amended. Joe second. Questions? Everyone clear on the process and everyone clear on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Stands unanimous. Andy, you have approval on the upper payment limit.
Thank you to the board.
Do you want to give a quick, and I mean quick, like a 1 or 2 minute for the board to remind them and to everyone online as to the process after this?
Sure. So the next step is, based on the approval of the board, we will submit the report to the Legislative Policy Committee. It's generally a group made up of General Assembly leadership. The Legislative Policy Committee will have 45 days to approve that action plan. And then once they've approved it, the board can take further action. That would likely be through the publication of regulations to implement this process that we've developed. Once that process is in place, you can then start to do the work outlined in this report. Feel free to clarify if anyone on the staff has any clarifications, but that's the general next step. They do have 45 days to take, the Legislative Policy Committee does have 45 days to take action on the report.
Great. So we're going to move to, if there are no questions on that, we are going to move to item 6.
Mr. Chair, we're trying to make sure we've got everything recorded correctly. Could you go over who moved and seconded the
Moved by Jerry, seconded by Joe with the amendment.
I'm sorry, and what was the amendment?
You worded it for Joe.
I added the corrections and yes, your wording.
Okay. Yeah, that was just clarification. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. On
Okay.
item 6.
Good afternoon. Next slide. As you know, you have previously adopted regulations setting up your cost review study process. Next slide, Christina. These are proposed primarily technical amendments to your existing regulations, and amendments to track and dovetail with the requirements of the upper payment limit action plan that you just adopted. These are being recommended as emergency amendments so that they can be implemented in the existing cost review study process, but also to go through the regular regulatory approval process, which would be through notice and comment under the Administrative Procedure Act. There's basically three very 50,000 foot overview of the kinds of the amendments that there are. The first being there's some clarification about certain data sources that are being used. There's some additional factors to be considered in the cost review study. And then third, I'll let you know when to change the slide. And then the third category is, again, to track what's in the upper payment limit action plan. Thank you. Next slide. So in the first category of data, we have three changes, and I would just point out for anybody who's not familiar with the way the Maryland Register works, anything that is new will be in italics. Anything that is set off in brackets is text that is being deleted. So here the three changes are to F, G, and H. And they are basically just clarifying that other databases containing relevant information other than the MCDB can be used, reports from state governmental entities, and then finally, data and analyses derived from quantitative and qualitative data collected by staff. Next slide. This is the section addressing the factors to be considered in the cost review. And again, these are either corrections that were oversights or misuse of terms and sort of that sort of thing. For example, C, therapeutic alternatives. Your existing regulations discuss extensively the cost information that can be considered, but did not include out-of-pocket costs and utilization. So that's why that's being added. For patient access, there was obviously, since this is number 3, there were a number of other elements concerning patient access that could be considered. This particular amendment is to clarify that the patient access program supported by the manufacturer, the ones that are relevant here are the ones surrounding the drug product that's under review. Next slide. Additional board factors that may be considered, and this is the sort of general category at the end. Otherwise, they were broken down into categories by subject matter. G3 is to clarify, and so it would now read with the edits, the number of pharmaceutical manufacturers that produce prescription drug products that are therapeutically equivalent to the drug product under study. And again, that was a clarification to make sure that the correct information was being provided for and being considered. The clarification that the analysis of the prescription drug products life cycle management included the market context information, which includes life cycle management, patent management, regulatory exclusivities, and then the correction from product copying to product hopping. Next slide. These are new additional factors. And again, prior slide talked about therapeutic equivalent. This is to, again, allow utilization and pricing information, analysis of state and regulatory compliance issues, input from those state and local government entities and their contractors, such as the health plan and plan administrators. Those are the eligible governmental entities, presumably, and others. Next slide. And then finally, there's the impact of utilization and spending on public budgets and a comparison of the spending with respect to relevant benchmarks. Again, that's to provide relevant information to do the cost review, and then analyses and research developed from a literature in response to comments or additional information being received. Next slide. So those are all the factors in the cost review study. The amendments here, again, are to just dovetail with the upper payment limit action plan, and that is to change to provide for a preliminary determination. So you see the text here is changed to preliminarily determine. Next slide. And then this is an explanation of what happens in the preliminary determination. And again, it's to make that affordability challenge assessment. the information that's been provided previously, that it is non-final and subject to revision and modification. Next slide. And then it goes on to explain that in that draft preliminary report that Mr. York was discussing earlier, the information that is included in that report includes the board's discussions or deliberations, the information that was considered in conducting the study, the circumstances or indicia reflecting the affordability challenge, and the preliminary determination. This then also provides that the public can comment on that draft preliminary determination report. Next slide. And this is a cross-reference to another change. This should be in italics, and this is to indicate at the beginning of the regulation where the board is charged with determining whether use of a prescription drug product has or will lead to an affordability challenge to the state healthcare system or high out-of-pocket costs, that they also identify the circumstances under which the prescription drug product has or will lead to the affordability challenge or the high out-of-pocket costs. Next slide. And then finally, this is the final determination. So the change is to allow for a preliminary determination, and this encapsulates the final determination, basically just to allow for a vote at the end of the process and approve the draft cost review report as final. And again, to underscore that that determination is not final until the final cost review report is ultimately adopted by the board. And again, that happens at the meeting when the board then either decides they're proposing or accepting policy actions or an upper payment limit, et cetera. And I believe that is the end. So staff would ask that the board adopt the proposed regulations, proposed amendments to COMAR 140104.
05.
Thank you. 0405. For submission as emergency regulations, as well as for submission through the ordinary regulatory process.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Let me kind of reverse this. Let's see, does anybody have any questions for Michelle before we entertain a motion for approval? Everybody okay with the changes? Okay.
A clarifying question for
Yep,
me.
yep.
This is on slide, this is one of the early slides, 05B, I think it was, 2, where it says analyses and data compilation. Yes. So just in H there, wanted to clarify, where it says collected, are we allowing for situations where what we're collecting are analyses, we're not doing the data analyses or collection ourselves? Does this include those scenarios where that's an outside entity maybe doing that work for us?
Are you asking, is the board staff collecting the data or doing the analyses?
Oh, I'm asking if this allows the board to have this work done external to the staff. So this H, because it says derived from data collected by board staff, I wanted to be sure that that allowed us, if we want an outside entity to do the qualitative data collection and analyses and reporting out, that they can do that.
No, this would be, by its express terms, it would be limited to data collected by board staff.
Including
there are other opportunities for additional information to be considered in the regulations, including derived from external analyses and modeling studies. That's already in the analyses.
Yes,
or derived from other kinds of governmental reports.
Yeah, I was more thinking about this with respect to the qualitative data. You know, we have in-house quantitative data analysis capabilities. We've certainly gone external for those. Here with the addition of the qualitative data, I wondered whether we would have the flexibility. If we want to do it ourselves, that's fine, but I feel like thinking about others who've had expertise and experience with that should be something we have access to. I don't know if we're set up for qualitative data.
As drafted, it is limited to data collected by board staff. It could be amended by the board if that is what you wish to do, or it could be deferred to another time if you would want to see whether this process is sufficient going through this. So you have multiple options. But to answer your direct question, is this as written limited to data collected by board staff? It is.
Okay,
But
that
Michelle,
clarifies. Thank
one
you.
thing I would want to clarify is that if we have a contractor that's doing work on behalf of the board, that is covered by this provision, right? And we
Correct.
contract out to an entity. They
If
can do
right,
the
if
work
it's
on
acting
behalf
as
of
an agent
Yep.
for the board.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Does that take care of your question, Barry?
Yes, it does. Thank
Okay.
you.
Great question. Good pickup. Is there anything else anybody else has before we entertain a motion? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval for Comar to move forward with 14-010405.
I
So
moved.
moved.
Mhm.
I have a Barry first. Is there a
Second.
Is that Joe?
No, that's Steve.
Steve? Great, thank you. I'll ask one last time, any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, approved. Thank you very much, Michelle, everyone. Andy, who's going to do the procurement for number?
I'll briefly go over the procurement. I think we are down to the very last few minutes of the meeting. I think we'll be able to keep everything else very quick. So I did want to flag that. So the cost review study process has a series of analyses that require clinical expertise, including the selection, assessment, and evaluation of therapeutic alternatives, and analyses that require clinical input. Staff is seeking approval of funds to enter into a university agreement between two state entities where they will provide specific services, including analytics capabilities that require certain expertise. Some of those analyses are ones that require direct clinical input, such as summarizing clinical information for the product under review, summarizing disease burden, and summarizing health economics research, among other cost review analyses that require clinical input. The staff is requesting the approval of a not to exceed amount of $63,000 for a university agreement with the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy to conduct these analyses for the 6 drugs that the board has selected for the cost review study process.
Andy, I do want to note that I would be recused from discussion and vote on this. So let me know when I should.
So noted.
I'm just curious, how you came up with that number of 63,000?
We have a statement of work that was available to our governmental interagency partner, and they analyzed the staff time that it would take to provide that information. So it's about 84 hours for each drug, though there's 2 drugs that are in the same class, so there's some economies of scale, and they remove some of the hours from there. So it's a evaluation of their staff time that they'll need to do the analysis.
Okay.
And
It's basically a bid.
and my comment is, will this be done in FY25? And do we have the funds in the budget?
Yes, this will be completed in FY25. We do have the funds. If the board wants to do cost reviews for additional drugs in FY25, we would come back to you for to amend this agreement.
And what line item is this coming out of?
Out of our general contractor line item. I can get you the actual budget code if it's needed.
Okay.
And do we have any provisions for overruns?
Not with this, the way it's stated, not to exceed.
Okay.
At least that's the way I
That's
see the
correct.
proposal. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a pretty straightforward thing. I think very economical, and I wouldn't anticipate overruns because it's it's not like we're building a bridge here or something like that. This is a very tight thing that we're asking them to do.
Okay, so vote on the procurement to University of Maryland School of Pharmacy as presented, not to exceed 63,000 in FY25. Funds are there. Call for the question.
So moved.
Second,
Stephen, Jerry.
Jerry.
Note Barry is recusing herself. All those in favor, aye.
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 Thank you. passed with Dr. recusing. Okay. I think that's all the voting today. Andy, you want to go over cost review update? And I noticed in the chat, I don't remember who it was, someone asked right after we did the UPL vote, wanted to know if you could go over the timeline with the after that as far as the legislative policy, I think.
Yeah, and I apologize. I thought I addressed that. So the first step is for the Legislative Policy Committee to finalize the action plan, which would then make the action plan a live document that we could do work on. The next step is board would need to take action to create the process for implementing so the same way we did the regulations for our cost review process, you would have to do something similar to set up your upper payment limit process. So the next immediate step would be for the board to approve regulations establishing that process. So that's the immediate process. We'd be sharing drafts of the regulations for public comment as we do for all board materials before it would go before the board.
Okay.
Once those regulations are in place, then the board can actually start the process that we talked through today.
Great. I think that answers Sarah's question.
Great, sounds good. So we will keep this very brief. Christina, if you want to pull this up, we just wanted to provide a quick status update on where we are for the cost reviews. So I know we've been talking a lot about the upper payment work, but in the background, the staff has been working through the cost review study process for the 6 drugs that were referred to us. So the next slide. So the things that have happened so far, we did have a 6-day comment period, and we are currently in the middle of the request for information. And then staff is currently drafting the dossier of data and analyses. Next slide. Public comments were due on July 22nd, and those have been provided to the board and reviewed by the staff. Next slide. The request for information was sent out, and then we can go to the next slide. We notified them by email, and then we also provided, we directly notified entities by email, and then we also posted on the website. Once folks are notified, they have a 30-day timeline to get the data to us, and then they can also ask for a 30-day extension. Next slide. The requests for information were sent out on July 25th, sent out and posted on the webpage on July 25th. That means that the initial RFIs were due on August 26th. We did have a number of entities, I believe 10 entities, requested a 30-day extension, which means those will be coming in on September 23rd. As part of that process, we also held a technical assistance call with the folks that may be interested in submitting data. We are hopeful that we'll get a lot of really good data as part of this process, and that will be useful for the cost review. So again, that should be coming to us on September 23rd, and we'll be incorporating that into the dossier for the cost review. Next slide. So also just wanted to note that we are doing everything within our power to protect this information. We take the confidentiality and proprietary element of the data very seriously. And also, I think the default is to call information confidential proprietary, i.e. anything that is not otherwise publicly available, we're going to be considering a trade secret and confidential and proprietary information and treating it with that due care. So again, just giving the general assurance that we want confidential and proprietary data submitted, and we will treat it with that due level of security and confidentiality. Next slide. So the next step is, again, staff is working in the background on the drugs and the cost review study process. We will publish public versions of what we call our dossier before an upcoming board meeting. So anytime that the board would be taking action on it, it would be provided as materials for the board meeting. Next slide. So we'll continue to work. It's now a top priority for us to continue to move forward with the cost review process. Any questions? All right.
Great, thank you. Just got a couple things. Again, I'd like to thank all those that have participated in the process the last year, both external and internal, and the board as well. Christina, do we have an update on the meeting for the stakeholder council, or will they have a meeting in October? Or I know we've kind of confiscated their date. So what, have they made a decision? Or are they still working on it?
We're still working on finalizing that, but I will be sure to keep the PDASC updated on any potential changes.
Okay, and I'm sure you'll post to the website for everybody.
Yes, and then Gov Delivery will go out. We just want to make sure we're giving the board flexibility to continue to move things along. So.
And along those lines, so just to make sure that all of my colleagues, we've got scheduled October 28th at this time for another virtual board meeting. And then November 25th would be live, and that would be round out the year. The 28th might have flexibility. We'll have flexibility depending on when and what we hear back from the policy committee. So we'll keep you apprised to that. And if we go to make a change, we will make sure that everyone's notified along with the external partners as well. Let me go around the horn. I know Joe had to leave after the procurement vote. Stephen, anything you have?
No, I don't have anything new to add.
Okay. And again, thanks for joining us today. Jerry?
So I note that, we've been doing a lot of work on the amount of the reports that are going to be doing on certain things. And I think we could have a meeting on October 10th to go over a lot of the data that Andy and everybody is put together for the cost reports. And, I think we should at least consider having that because, I've been working individually with them, and I assume that some of the other board members have as well, but I don't have the benefit of hearing their comments and those things. So I think we could at least consider, we'd originally had one on October 10th, and we could consider having that if we have something to present. But I can leave it up to you and to Andy to decide whether or not, but I think it's something to consider.
Yeah, Andy broached it with me, Jerry. I would rather just leave the 28th. The 28th was moved back to accommodate the 45 days if the policy committee needed 45 days. The 8th was only set up for that reason. So I just kind of like to leave it at the 28th. If we get it early, then great. If they respond to us in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll reset it. And it could very well be the 8th or the 10th. But at this point in time, I'd rather leave it the 28th and 25th. The other thing is, with such a small staff, and look, I hate to keep saying this, but the reality is that these meetings take a lot of prep time. And then the notices 2 weeks in advance, all of those things that have to occur under Maryland law with the website and locations and that type of thing. Virtual does make it easier, but it still doesn't change the timelines that we have to adhere to. So we've got the 28th out there. We've changed it once already. I really don't want to bounce around for people. I mean, everybody else, this is a volunteer board, and we, a lot of us have other things to do as well. But we'll keep it under advisement. Is there anything? How about you, Barry? Anything?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Great. Andy, are we good?
Nothing else from staff.
Okay. Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
I
Second.
second.
Stand adjourned till October 28th or sooner. Thank you all very much.
Can I just say one thing
Sure,
before
sure.
everybody leaves? I just want to thank the members of the board for your outreach to me during my recent sickness. I'm still recovering, but we're getting there.
Good. And we're
Great
glad
to see you.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.